Well, good morning, everyone. It is good to see you. Oh my gosh, I've been preaching to pews for an entire year, and it's just good to have you here. It's so good to have you here. My name is Charlie. If you've not been to St. Paul's before, I'm Charlie. I'm the rector. It's good to see you. This is Gwen. She's our associate rector. I don't think she's ever been in a service with you yet, right? Okay. Super weird. But that's what this season has been about. The title of this sermon is Resurrection Through Tears. Resurrection Through Tears. And it takes its name from an encounter I had one morning in the side chapel of a former parish of mine. I walked in one morning to say my prayers, and kneeling in that side chapel was a woman, and she was weeping. Weeping. Jean. We'll call her Jean. Jean was a regular parishioner, but I hadn't seen her for some weeks. "Good morning," I said. "I haven't been to church in several weeks," she said through her tears. "That's okay. Don't worry about it." "What's going on? Can I help you?" I asked. Jean went on to tell me that her partner of 30 years had died a few weeks earlier. "I haven't been to church," she said. "I haven't been to church because I'm afraid that it will be too painful." Jean was mourning the loss of her beloved, and she had a lot of tears. I can understand. A few weeks after we buried my father, Matthew and I were at a sandwich shop. And I'll never forget the ham sandwich in that sandwich shop. Because as I was eating it, I began to wonder, how many ham sandwiches had my father eaten? And I lost it. I was a mess of tears within seconds, right there in front of God and everybody at Hickory Hams. And then I'll never forget a friend who once said to me, "Oh, Charlie, I can't come to your church. It's too beautiful, and it always makes me cry." Tears. Tears and resurrection. Is there a connection? A good person to ask would be Mary. Mary Magdalene probably hadn't slept well all night long, remembering all that had happened the day before. She had probably tossed and turned. After all, she had seen her friend tried unfairly. She had seen him beaten. She had seen him crucified. She had seen him die. And these are not the images that make for a good night's sleep. And at some point, you might be able to relate, she just threw back the covers and said, "Oh, I might as well go ahead and get up." And so she walks to the tomb. She wanted to be close to Jesus again. She had followed him around his whole life, probably. And she'd been with Jesus through it all. And now she wanted to be close one more time. So she goes to the tomb, and there she weeps. John's gospel has a lot of weeping in it. John's gospel has a lot of weeping in it. In this passage alone, the word weep is used 4 times. And when a word is repeated in Scripture, we should pay attention to it. And at this point, the weeping also points us back to the tomb of Lazarus. Remember when Jesus wept at the death of his friend? Sadness is real in the Gospel of John. And sadness comes about as a result of closeness. Jesus and Lazarus were close. Mary and Jesus were close, and closeness makes loss all the more difficult. If we take nothing away from this Easter service, we should take away that God understands our tears. And there have been plenty of tears in this past year, haven't there? Tears. Tears when we could not be with our loved ones when they were hurting or sick. Tears when we could not participate in major celebrations like graduations or the births of new grandchildren. Tears for the loss of life to gun violence, racial injustice, and prejudice. Tears at the death of friends, parents, and grandparents. Tears when we had to put a funeral on hold, when we couldn't bury our dead. And of course, there were tears of joy, We saw overwhelming acts of compassion and love in this last year. And of course, tears at the gift of new birth. So just what happens when we cry? Have you ever thought about that? What happens when we cry? Well, I looked it up. And if you are a medical professional, I invite you to cover your ears because I went to WebMD. And WebMD says that stress tightens muscles and heightens tension. So when you cry, you release some of that. Crying activates the parasympathetic nervous system and restores the body to a state of balance. So maybe that's why after a good cry, we feel a little bit better, if only for a little while. A sense of balance has been restored. In so many ways, my friends, you and I join with Mary at the tomb this morning to cry. And in crying, we hope to find some sense of balance, of normalcy. But Mary, this morning, does not find normalcy. When she gets to the tomb, Jesus' body is not there, and she is super stressed out. And she wonders if his body had been stolen. The stealing of bodies from tombs was very prevalent in that day. And it is here through our tears, through her tears, that we begin to see the sunrise of Easter. And it all begins in a garden. In John's Gospel, the tomb is in a garden. And it's not an accident that our altar looks like a garden this morning. We're told earlier in the Gospel of John that Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus placed Jesus in a tomb that is in a garden. And this garden points us to that most famous garden, the Garden of Eden, which is a place of closeness and harmony and perfection. Now, we don't know how long Jesus has been wandering around in that garden when he catches up with Mary. So I like to imagine him wandering around and sniffing the flowers and feeling the bark of the trees, or maybe looking up to a blue sky. Jesus is the new Adam. When Jesus shows up, Mary doesn't recognize him. She thinks he's the gardener. And Jesus asks why she's weeping, and Mary's like, "Have you seen the body of Jesus? And if you have, can you tell me where it is?" And then Jesus calls her name, Mary. And then her eyes are open. And she responds, "Teacher." Mary's overwhelmed at this point. Man, she's excited. She has not lost her Jesus after all. He's back. What joy! So she clings to him. She hangs on to him. And then Jesus says the most unusual thing. He says, "Do not hold on to me." Now, don't you think that's kind of harsh? I do. But there's a great preacher named Fred Craddock who gives some sense of insight into why Jesus might have said this to Mary. He says that even for a disciple like Mary, Easter does not return her and Jesus to the past. Easter opens up a movement toward a new future. Easter opens up a movement toward a new future. You see, Mary wants things to return to the way that they were. She wants to hang on. She wants everything to turn and to go back to normal. How many times have you said that this year? Oh, I wish we could just go back to normal. We all want things to return to normal. We want to hang on to those we love and the lives that we lived with them, and we don't like for things to change. But resurrection is not about returning to the way things once were. Resurrection is about the future. I can't blame Mary for wanting to hang on. I would have done the same thing. But the resurrection points us ahead, even ahead beyond the tomb and beyond death. If you're here today, if you're listening, if you're watching, it must mean that you believe that life somehow continues. Maybe you wonder why that is and who made it so. There is, I believe, an eternal future for all of us. But the resurrection is not only about the eternal. The new movement of resurrection, of Christ calling us to a new future, is about now. It's about the way we live life now. It's about the decisions that we make now. It's about the way we treat our planet and our neighbor and ourselves now. Resurrection is not about holding on to the way things always have been. Resurrection is a call to bring about life and to help all of life flourish in the name of love. Growing up, I wonder if you experienced this phrase. I did all the time. You ever heard anybody say, "Oh, I just love her to death"? Or, "I just love that person to death. I love them to death." What is that all about, really? What does that mean? Well, on this Easter day, we gather because someone was loved to life. God caused the resurrection by loving Jesus to life again. And if we're going to be a resurrection people, as we are called to be, wouldn't you think that we too should be in the business of loving people not to death, but loving them to life? And I think that just might be what our tears are about. They're about living life fully and loving life fully. Our tears come when we have loved or are loved deeply. And if God is love, it must mean that God is present in and through our tears. Jean, the woman I was referring to earlier, she gradually made her way back to church, a place where she could be honest that her beloved was born up into the resurrection. And she also came to know church as a place where she could be herself, honestly, fully, and completely. She could be honest about the ways that she was being called to move forward and into resurrection. I never saw her or gave her communion when tears weren't streaming down her cheeks. But I know that through those tears, resurrection was happening, and God was loving her back to life. It may interest you to hear a little bit about another man who was very interested in loving a people back to life. On this day, April 4th, 1968, Dr. King was assassinated, shot and killed on a second-floor balcony of a hotel. Dr. King was dedicated to loving people back to life. And in the footsteps of Jesus, he cried many tears, even the tears of his ancestors, our ancestors. And through them, he too saw resurrection as a movement into a new future. On this Easter morning, we celebrate the victory of love. Love wins. Love beats out everything that humanity threw at it. And it said, I can take that, and I'm going to show you what I can do with it. I'm going to turn it into a resurrection, into love. And the deal is this: in the Spirit of Jesus, we cannot keep that love to ourselves. We are called to share it. It must be shared. So today we ask ourselves, have you ever been loved back to life? Have you ever loved anyone else back to life? And is there anyone out there right now that needs to be loved back to life? Maybe it's time that you and I, like Dr. King and so many other who have gone before, put on our resurrection shoes and get to walking and follow the resurrected one who is always leading us into freedom and into life where there is neither sighing nor tears, but life everlasting. Amen.